Thank you for joining us this morning in this on this very eventful day for a very eventful thing that we're doing here at Cincinnati Public Schools. As you all know, we launched a superintendent search probably in early June, and we shared with you and the members of the community that we wanted our search process to be one that was engaging and transparent. And what we found is that it has indeed been very transparent and very intentional every step of the way. So the announcement that we are making today is part of a promise, again, to be transparent and to involve the community. We have ended a very important process as part of the steps in naming the superintendent, and that being the most important aspect of this process, which is engaging the community. What we wanted to do was to ask the community to help us and inform us of how we design the superintendent profile and the job description. So a lot of what you'll hear about today from our guests and from Monica Rosen will be aimed at sharing with the public a little bit about that process. So in a moment, we'll have the CEO of the Alma Group, Monica Rosen, come on and share with us a little bit about the engagement process with anticipation for a more comprehensive report to be provided at our board meeting this evening at 6:30. I first want to acknowledge all of those in our community who participated in this phase of the search. Whether you responded to a survey or sent us an email or joined us for one of the focus groups or made time on a one-on-one basis, we value all of you. We value the input that you've given us. We got a great response, and again, Monica Rosen will address that. We received information from parents, caregivers, teachers, principals, other staff, and many community partners. And so we thank you again for taking the time to provide the feedback that we as the Board of Education needed to create this profile for the next Cincinnati Public Schools superintendent. We began this process of community engagement back in October. So the search actually was initiated, all the planning around it began in June. October, we moved forward with this engagement process. And we believe that we have a very solid job description ready to, and in preparation for conducting interviews and so forth. And Monica is going to come forward now to give us the details around the community engagement process. And as I shared with you, she will do a more comprehensive report on that at tonight's board meeting. So I'd like to introduce Monica Rosen from the Alma Advisory Group out of Chicago, Illinois. And Monica has been fabulous to work with, and we look forward to continuing our work with her. So at this point, I will introduce Monica Rosen, and I'll come back up later to respond to any questions that you all might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Am I coming across clearly? If we can go ahead and put the PowerPoint slides up, I'll begin sharing. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you here today. We can go ahead and turn to the next slide. This morning, we're going to be sharing an update on the superintendent search process. I want to start by saying that the Board of Cincinnati Public Schools made it very clear to all my advisory group at the start of this process that they see hiring the next superintendent of Cincinnati Public Schools as most likely the most important decision that they are charged with as a board. And it was important to them that the process be transparent, have high integrity, and really to be guided by the input of the greater Cincinnati community. And for us, that's more than just getting input from the community. It's about having authentic conversation with as many members of the community as we could have. If we can move to the next slide. With the board, all my advisory group planned 3 key activities for engaging the community. We carried out 3 community gatherings in each region of Cincinnati. Our focus was to learn, to share with the community about the process, and to sit down with people in small group settings to hear their aspirations, what they are looking for in the next superintendent for Cincinnati Public Schools. We also carried out individual interviews and focus groups. We met with union leaders, we met with parents, teachers, principals, students, and also engaged them in similar conversations based on their roles and what they had at stake with this decision. And finally, we launched a staff and community survey, and we ended up extending the deadline an additional week to get as many responses as possible. Let's move on to the next slide. In total, we held 40 meetings, and we met with personally over 230 individuals. Parents, students, teachers, leaders, district staff, community members, partners, and alumni who all shared with us their vision for the students of Cincinnati Public Schools, the challenges they saw that the next superintendent would be spearheading and leading through, and the strengths of the district that the next superintendent needed to champion and sustain. We can move to the next slide. Our survey had an excellent response rate. We were just shy of 3,600 responses to our survey. 81% of the respondents were parents, teachers, and students. We had respondents from every single one of Cincinnati Public Schools. Almost all of our principals responded, and nearly half of the respondents were people of color. We'll move on. Thank you. So I'd love to share with you a little bit about what we learned from the community. The community is clearly seeking an education leader with strong engagement and communication skills. What we heard over and over again is that community members want a leader who is visible and present in the community and in schools. Someone who will maintain open lines of communication, including with parents and with staff, and someone who is responsive to parent concerns. The community wants a leader with an unwavering drive to do what's best for students, someone who values and seeks to understand the needs of CPS students, schools, and their communities, and someone who communicates and collaborates transparently with all stakeholders, someone who leads with empathy, not ego, someone who acknowledges, supports, and elevates the voices of students, staff, and families over any other political agenda. Next slide. Many parents, in particular, express the desire to emphasize learning while also continuing to support students more holistically. Parents shared the desire for CPS to develop the students as critical independent thinkers who know they're valuable to society. And they want a leader who can help accelerate learning and growth, informed by the lessons learned during the pandemic. And finally, they're hoping for a leader who will foster a commitment to caring for and belonging to a diverse cultural community. Parents also want students' holistic needs to be met as well. They're looking for resources that support mental health and well-being, and environments where students feel safe, where they know who they can talk to and are cared for as whole people. We also heard from community stakeholders that there's a need for support at site-based leadership of schools, allocating resources equitably and providing proactive development and support to staff. Next slide, please. Our search process moves forward from here. We now have a job profile that is launched and it's live on the Alma Advisory Group website. Our next stages of our process include casting the net as wide as we can, finding as many candidates as possible, and recruiting candidates who fit the profile that has been so deeply informed by the community. As candidates are identified, we will carry out interviews with board members. Those interviews will be based on the competencies that have been identified by community members and prioritized by the board. The board's intention is to engage the community once again at the finalist stage, to give individuals the opportunity to meet with finalists and to provide their input to help inform the board's final decision. And once a candidate is selected, the board will plan for that transition and for the support that the next leader will need. Our goal is to find the next superintendent, someone that everyone in the community can get behind, can be excited about leading the district into its next chapter. Next slide. We thank you so much for your time today. We will be providing more detailed information at tonight's board meeting and wanted to communicate with the press this morning our early findings. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Monica. Very well done and very clear and concise. It gives you a great idea, a picture of where we are now and where we're headed. I want to again invite the community to participate and share in the with us this evening the full scope of this presentation. I think the community will find this to be a very interesting process. And as I said earlier, we have been very intentional about this community engagement process. And as you can see, being intentional paid off when we have that many people, 3,600 to 3,800, in total all the surveys and focus groups and meetings that we've had. We've been very pleased with that. And we will continue to do so throughout this process. And as you can note on Monica's slide that talks about where we are in the process, we are beginning in the recruitment phase now. And we'll keep the community abreast of where we are with that process. I would like to take a moment to introduce and welcome, if they so choose, they can come up and help answer questions from you guys. The two board members who are our point people for this process, and that's Ben Lindy and Eve Bolton. So if you'd like to come up and join us. And if you want to make a few remarks, that would be fine, and then we can open up for questions. Come on over.
Thanks very much, President Jones. I don't have much more to add except to say thank you both to our wonderful search firm and to all the thousands of people in the community who play a role here. Our board is deeply committed to making families and students the center of where we focus, who our leader next needs to be, and where we go next. We're excited to keep going. We want to say thank you.
That participated, and also the folks within the district that have helped make this possible. We really felt very good and trust very much so the Alma Advisory Group. We know this is the most important thing we decide, and we know it means figuring out the future. We're excited about it, and we also want to reassure people that even though there's going to be a change in board membership, the board long ago, back in June or July, developed a sort of hybrid approach to this so that our newest members will be involved in the discussions, as well as our veteran members who might be leaving. So we'll get the full range of those views. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you to my fellow board members. And at this time, we'd like to open up for questions from the media. And Monica is with us, and so feel free to address your questions to some of your questions to her as well. Yes. Okay. So let me start by saying that you're sort of asking a question about timeline. So here's where we are, and we want to be open and realistic with you about that. It would be great to be able to identify someone by the end of the year. But recognizing where we are in the process, we're thinking of a time frame of starting from the end of December through possibly the 1st of February. And this is a topic of ongoing conversation and discussion between the board and the ALMA group. And we're sort of gauging where we are in that process right now. So having said that, I think the reality for us is, and recognizing that across the country, there's sort of a national trend around superintendents moving around. We want the best. So we're not going to shoot ourselves in the foot with this. We want to make sure that we select the right person. That transition will occur. I want to say sometime around early spring. The one fact that I can share with you is that most superintendents across the country are involved in a contract. And so we have to work, whoever we select, we have to work with them on some of the contractual pieces on their end, on our end. So I can't give you a specific time other than that time frame of the end of December to 1st of February. Yes. Well, yes. Well, the work will continue. Business as usual. We have an interim superintendent in place. We will continue to do the work that's in front of us. One of the conversations that we will have as a board is that shift. What happens when we're in transition? Again, we don't have the specific answer to that, but we have to plan ahead for that. So those are the upcoming conversations and discussions that we need to have as a board. How are we going to work through this transition? Well, that's a hard question to answer. I mean, once we identify and solidify a contract with the superintendent, it's our hope and sort of our expectation by contract that they will honor their contract and they stay and they like it. One of the things I can tell you about this process, which I am so grateful for having the ALMA group working with us around that, is that we have a pretty tight job description and competencies and things that we want. And I can remember one of our board members saying in a very jokingly way, but we're kind of serious about it. Well, who would want this job? Because we set very high standards. Who would want this job? And we kind of chuckled about that. Well, the person who gets this job is going to be the person who wants to be here. And they're going to demonstrate that they want to be here by staying here, because we have a lot of work to do. And we're hoping that the person who comes here will roll up their sleeves, jump right in, and stay for the duration, because that's what it's going to take, somebody with a great deal of commitment. Sure. Hi, Maddie.
Yeah. Okay. Hi. I've got two questions for you. First, in these notes that Alma provided, there are some things that the community said that they're looking for improvements for from the board, and one of those is the feeling that decisions have been made in a sort of top-down manner. And obviously, you've been collecting input from the community this far. Going forward, how can the community hope to contribute to this process once you've identified some of the candidates?
I'm going to let Ms. Foley's going to respond.
Great question, and I think that's one of the areas where we kind of solve it. It's hearing the community. And there's a long history at CPS, very frankly, of site-based management, site-based decision-making. We go back almost 40 years of local school decision-making groups made of people in the community that are part of that school. So I think it's good. What we're hearing is that apparently the community wants to return to a stronger, in-depth approach to that way of governing and also managing and decision-making. And so it probably would be important for somebody that would apply to be able to demonstrate that they are committed to that more ground up rather than top down approach. So I think that's something we'll have to be watching. And since CPS was one of the very first districts in the country that helped invent that, we ought to go back to that kind of tradition to a certain extent. And I think people will come here because of that tradition. And I'm glad the community reminded us of that tradition.
Thank you. I have one other question, and it's from some community members that I've talked to so far during this process. There's a concern that someone coming from outside of Cincinnati that maybe doesn't know this city, that maybe isn't a direction that people want us to go down. Can you talk about where you're looking for candidates and if there's a sort of preference for someone from Cincinnati?
Okay, I'm going to ask Mr. Lindy to address, and it may also be a question when you ask about where are they coming from. Monica Rosen may be able to help.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for the question, and I do think it's a really important one because truthfully, I think there are strengths on both sides. There's such power for someone who knows Cincinnati well and can speak to its incredible diversity and its different kinds of needs. I also think there's such power in someone who has seen other parts of the country and seen different things that work and make a difference for kids. And truthfully, one of the reasons we're so united behind this process is we're starting with what parents and community members are looking for. And then whoever has the most of that, whether that is someone from Cincinnati, someone from outside, that's going to be the right person. And we think that once that person is here and has a chance to show families and community members how we're being responsive to the things they're looking for, I think that'll be the best evidence of why this approach is one.
I'm going to ask Monica if she'd like to respond to that question as well.
I can, and I think Ben said it better than I could. We start with what it is that is truly required of the role. What are the skills most important? What are the background and experiences? What are the values that the community is seeking, and going out and finding someone who meets those values, who has those skill sets, who has a proven track record of accomplishing the goals that the district has and that the board has set. And so for us, we are looking deeply locally within the region, absolutely, but we're also casting a wide net. We are looking nationally, and we're trying to find that special, unique leader, whatever it takes.
Corey Sharber with NPR.
WVFU.
Thanks for having me. I just saw here in the little handout you gave us, it said that you guys got close to 3,600 respondents. I was wondering if that was the number you were shooting for. Were you shooting for more respondents? Do you feel like you got enough from the community? Any thoughts on that?
Monica, would you like to address that question?
Absolutely. So more is always better, but actually what we were really pleased with was the representation of who participated. Ultimately, over half of those who responded were parents and caregivers. 21% of the participants were teachers, and 9% were students. So we were really pleased that we got to hear from voices from really all over the community. Just about every zip code in Cincinnati was represented in the results, and as I mentioned earlier, 100% of our schools. Initially, we weren't sure, so we actually extended the survey deadline by a week. We almost doubled the number of respondents in that time, so we're glad that we did it. And we feel that what came through in the survey was consistent with what we heard in the focus groups and in our interviews as well. Very consistent feedback from the community. So we feel we have a really good sense of what the community is hoping for in its next leader.
My next question might be getting a little too in the weeds. I was wondering, since Tiana Ahmad has been the interim superintendent for the past half year, is she being considered for the role, especially considering some of the superintendents you may be seeking may not break their contracts and come here, or they might get better deals elsewhere?
Okay, well, my response to that is certainly if she's qualified, she can certainly submit her application. But as the board standing here right now, we're not able to tell you. I mean, you would have to ask her directly about her interest, but we're not in a position to say one way or the other. However, if she applies, it's just like any other candidate. If she meets the qualifications, then we certainly would consider that.
I'm wondering if you've started to receive applications, and if so, what do they look like? Okay.
Monica?
We have not yet started to receive applications. The posting is going live today. And so we'll have further updates in the future on that.
Any final questions? I know we already talked a little bit about timeline, but is there like a hard stop or deadline to apply for the job?
Maddie, we don't have a hard line stop. And the reason I gave that is because, the process, has taken a little time, and we wanted to make sure that we covered all the steps appropriately. We have a couple of changes in terms of board transition. It's at the end of the year. We have board members who are leaving and board members coming on. We have to make sure that our board process is working efficiently. So we have to stick right now with that sort of time frame of October to the 1st of February. But I promise you, once we nail that down, we'll certainly communicate that to the public.
And I can answer for Alma that we will continue to recruit applicants on a rolling basis. So we are not defined by a set deadline to apply at this point in time.
Any other questions? Okay, well, we thank you all for coming again. We look forward to seeing you this evening. And then to our community, please join us for a full presentation from the ALMA Advisory Group, and we'll see you this evening. Thank you.